What's up YouTube? So today I'm going to show you how to make Bitwig's vocoder not suck. So, I'm sorry Bitwig, the vocoder kind of sucks. Actually, it doesn't suck. It's very cool. The problem is that the default preset, when you open it, really sucks. So it kind of gives you a bad impression of the plugin. Today I want to show you how to re-engineer it so it acts more like a traditional vocoder, and then you can save that as your own default preset to use whenever you need. So, let's dive in and have a look. So this example sound is a vocal chant that I actually got from it's an old Kontakt library called Gilnei, Voice of the Elves. There's some pretty cool kind of like staccato, legato, chant type of stuff in there. Anyway, I just sampled out a couple of hits and I want to show you how we can remake Bitwig's vocoder's default preset to, function much better. Firstly, what I want to do is I want to convert this into a multi-sample, just so that we can kind of like trigger it as we need to. What we want to do is, because it's kind of like on the beat already, we can slice it at quarter notes. So what we want to do is we actually want to dive into the editor, and we can actually just go like this and say distribute select equally. And so we can use this to basically select what sound is playing. We actually want the pitch to play on a variety of notes. So we can actually just move these. We want to make sure that the key tracking is on. We can actually select these and do it here in the inspector. And then it should do it for all of them. And then what we can do is we can actually set the root key down, or just move these all up, and then set the root key down to C3, because then they should all be in the same pitch. And we can actually change the pitch of each hit, and then we can select the hit this way. Cool. Okay, that should be about it. So we can actually just remove that from the project real quick. And so now we can actually make a new MIDI, and now we can just use this to select the different hits. And here what we can do is we can put a random. Let's set this random to note, and then set the time to hold. So then each note, it's going to generate a new value. And we can set this to the select. You might need to go in and actually edit. You see sometimes it gets the hits slightly off here. Okay, so the reason why I like to create samplers with these kinds of things, I know we're going on a bit of a tangent, but trust me, is because now not only can we change the pitch like directly here, so we can kind of fit it to our song, but we can also, use envelopes to kind of like change it and kind of create more of a synthy type of sound with it. I just find it's a bit easier to create like multiple variations once you have it like loaded into a sampler like this. And also it's going to be kind of like always randomized there. Let's actually get onto the vocoder, which is what this video is about, right? So by default, the vocoder actually has a noise input on the carrier. And like most vocoders we know, they function with a synth voice on the carrier. And so that's why it's a little bit confusing. Kind of just straight off the bat gives you not very pleasant sound. So straight off the bat, I mean, the sort of first thing that I generally do to create better sound is to just remove these and add a sawtooth oscillator instead. We may just want to attenuate the volume. It's already giving us a much more vocoder-like sound. So here we can use this pitch to actually offset the kind of octave of this oscillator. But what I like to use is a transpose note device over here, because then we can kind of just quickly transpose it in octaves. And so remember what I said is like now we can actually transpose these notes, right? And the coolest thing is this sampler is kind of not always linked to the transpose. So for example, we can transpose the pitch of the sampler different to the pitch of the transpose. And that way you're kind of changing the texture of the sound while the vocoder creates the pitch of the sound. Watch this. Say, for example, we're producing the track in F. what I would do is I would use the semitone here to add 5 semitones to the incoming MIDI. And so what happens then is the vocoder produces the pitch of F, while the pitch of the sampler doesn't really matter. What this does is this kind of changes the texture or the formant of the sound. And we can use the speed control of the sampler as well. So that's the basic setup, right? You don't necessarily have to use SAW. You could use Vital or a actual VST plugin. The reason I like to do this is it's very kind of like low weight. It's just an oscillator and an output. There's no filters and stuff that are getting loaded into the signal to use extra CPU. Does that make sense? You could also bypass all of this, instead of the brown noise oscillator or the white noise oscillator, just enable this audio receiver and then choose a source here of, let's say, for example, Vital or whatever the case is. But I don't like that workflow because then you tend to have a project which has got all these different tracks and they all link together and it just becomes a freaking mess. So I prefer to just nest it inside these devices because you can in Bitwig, So that's the basic vocoder setup, right? How do we take it to the next level? Most of the time with vocoders, you have a chord. You don't actually have a single note playing. So how do we generate an actual chord here? There's several ways of doing this. We could create a note grid device which duplicates the incoming signal, right? Or we could create a series of Bitwig devices to do that for us. So I'm going to go through both methods, actually. First thing I want to do is I want to create a chain, because inside the chain we can actually nest all these things and it just becomes a little bit easier in terms of signal flow. Here, what I want to do is I want to add a multi-note, okay? What the multi-note is going to do is this is going to basically duplicate the incoming note like several times. So we want to make sure that this grid patch is not mono. Sometimes by default grid patches are mono. I think I've set mine to mono. But also I think that that noise oscillator by default is mono. So if we set the voice count up, I think we need an ADSR in here to control the voices. Yeah, to kill them. What I'll usually do is add every note in like the chromatic series, right? So it'll be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through. However, the problem is that multi-note only allows, I think it's 8 lanes, right? So how do we get in 12 notes into 8 lanes? There's a little trick. So what we want to do is we actually want to put 0 and plus 1, and then another multi-note that does every second. Does that make sense? So it'll be 0 plus 2 plus 4, and then that plus 1 will basically fill in the gaps. I think that technically should work. It's going to give us every note in the harmonic in the chromatic series. Which obviously doesn't sound very pleasant, right? But what we want to do is we want to, let's say for example, just call this chain note generation or generator. And then what we want to do is we want to create something here, key filter, okay? And then here what we can do is we can put the transpose afterwards. And so now if we just change this to whatever scale we want to work with and then turn this to filter, it's going to take out notes that aren't in that specific scale. So if we say melodic minor, then it's only going to play notes in that specific scale, right? You can instead use something like transpose map. And then what you can do is you can use this to map specific notes to specific notes. So say, for example, if you want, I think these are the incoming, you could set them to like what notes you actually want. So here, for example, if you set them all to C, no matter what you play, it'll be, it will pop out a C. And so here we can say we want some Ds, D sharps, some fifths, what I do then is I'll basically just use this note transpose afterwards. So this is mapped to, say, for example, C specific scale that you punch in. You can just leave that and then just change this semitones here to fit the note of your project. Does that make sense? I like the texture of that F. So, okay, that's how you do it with Bitwig devices. With NoteGrid, it's actually a bit simpler, but a little bit more confusing for those who don't quite understand how NoteGrid works and how the voice stacking in NoteGrid works. Basically, what we want to do is we want to set the NoteGrid to stack to the amount of voices that we want in the chord, and then we use that kind of voice stack offset to pitch the different voices and then quantize them going into the kind of resulting device. So first thing that we're going to want is a quantizer. Send the pitch through the quantizer. We can actually just quickly put in some notes like this. And then here what we want to do is we want to add in a transpose. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we want to set up a value and a modulator output. Modulator output we send to the transpose. And then here we want to set up a voice stack parameter. Stack spread. We want to enable, let's say 5-6 voices for now. And then we modulate the value parameter. And so this changes the transpose for each voice and generates that chord for us automatically. And we can just keep spreading to spread more voices in the chord. Or we can actually spread this, like for example to 48, to get more like width in the chord. Actually what we can do is let's set this to 48 and let's put like an attenuator here in the middle, because then we can use this to kind of like focus the chord in. This one we also need to combine with a transpose. What we can also do to add a little bit of excitement, or kind of like detune to the sound, or unison, is we can use a voice stack parameter on this saw as well. Let's say voice stack spread, and we detune it. So let's say -1 to +1, and then we detune this hertz amount. And that gives us like a 5 voice unison. We can actually spread it 6, however many voices we want. But be careful, that's going to start to take a toll on your CPU. and volume. Then you can just enable that and disable that over here. Okay, so let's look at some of the actual parameters on the vocoder. We can actually close this up. What I generally like to do is actually add macros over here just to make things a little bit easier. What you can do is you can actually name them so that they're similar to maybe what you know from your favorite vocoders and that kind of thing. But I just find it easier to, say for example, if you have a large chain, the vocoder takes up quite a lot of space and you don't really need this kind of spectral information when you're just quickly sound designing. Do you know what I mean? Most of the time you just need like the brightness control. You jump in there, edit the key to your liking, and that's done. Do you know what I mean? So some of the important controls I would say would be these bands controls. If you didn't know, a vocoder is basically a spectral filter bank. It's basically 8 filters or 80 filters, however many you set up over here, however many bands you set up. And what it does is it basically imprints the incoming signal with the band's volume from the carrier. So essentially reducing the bands kind of like reduces the bit rate, but what it can do is it can kind of give you a bit more of a spectrally sound. Whereas higher bands tend to give you a bit more of a natural sound. I find when reducing the bands, Bitwig tends to boost the volume a little bit. So what you can do is you can actually counteract that by reducing the volumes while you boost the bands. Does that make sense? Kind of like fine tune it. You see, as you boost the bands, the volume goes down and vice versa. Okay, that's a bit much, but you get the idea. The attack and the release also play quite a large role in the sound. So like a lower band rating with a lower attack and release tend to give you a more spectral sound. And we also want to set up a bandwidth control for this. So we can set up another macro. And actually just duplicate this a few times because there'll be a couple more controls. And then this one we set into plus minus and bandwidth control. Because we reduce that, it gives out that kind of more spectral sound. So like I said, also using this macro control allows you to fine tune the ranges that you can use. So for example, I often find like this bandwidth goes way too high and way too low, but then just kind of fine tuning the exact ranges that you want allows you to really fine tune it, And then lastly, let's just link the formant and brightness. Maybe we can give this a bit of envelope and maybe trigger every second one. So what I'll do is I'll actually upload both the preset with the Bitwig devices to my Patreon, and also the one made with the NoteGrid devices to my Patreon. So if you want, you can kind of dive in there and re-engineer it and figure out how it's done if you didn't follow the video, or you can just load it up and use whichever one you prefer. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. If you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. Yeah, cheers.